We're thinking of moving in with my in-laws now that we're expecting a baby.
My mom is still pretty young. She'd probably be happy to help with the housework and take care of her grandchild, right?
My son and his wife seemed genuinely convinced they were doing a good thing, telling me this with big smiles on their faces. My husband chimed in, making it even harder for me to find the words.
Bob and Karen really care about you, Mary. This is a great idea. Let's all live together.
This was not a great idea for me. I was frustrated with both my son and his wife, and my husband, for not understanding this. My name is Mary. I currently live with my husband, just the two of us. Our son Bob married a woman named Karen last year. Karen is a modern young woman with a cute smile, but as a mother-in-law, there are things that concern me. She doesn't help with cooking or cleaning when she visits. She just watches TV and laughs with my husband and Bob. I always helped out when I visited my in-laws, but maybe daughters-in-law these days don't do that. Even if Karen offered to help, I'd probably decline because I have my own way of doing things. I felt a gap in our values. Maybe this is how mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflicts start. I've never expected much from others, so I just thought about it as if it were someone else's problem. I'm a career woman, still working as an office employee. I didn't climb the corporate ladder because I loved my job. I did it out of necessity while raising Bob. My husband also worked, but he had health issues and changed jobs frequently, so his salary wasn't great. I had to work hard because Bob wanted to attend private high school and college. That doesn't mean my husband helped with housework. In the past, it was expected that women would do the housework. I always thought it would be quicker if I just did it myself, rather than teaching my husband. Perhaps that was my mistake. Bob, who grew up watching his father, turned out to be a man who doesn't do any housework. When I expressed concern to Karen, she said, "Don't worry, I'm re-educating him." Maybe my parenting wasn't successful. I was busy with work and had to rely on my late mother for most of Bob's care. But hearing my daughter say she's re-educating my son was a blow. I had my issues with Karen, my husband, and even Bob, but family are still strangers to each other in some ways. As long as we're not causing each other trouble, I thought, let everyone live their lives. Then one day, Bob and Karen came to me with an unexpected proposal. We're actually expecting a baby. Bob and Karen came over for their usual visit and told us they had important news. Karen rubbed her belly and smiled shyly. This would be the first grandchild for both me and my husband. We couldn't help but smile and congratulate Bob and Karen. My husband even jumped the gun, asking,
"Is it a boy or a girl?"
Bob laughed.
"Slow down, we don't know yet."
Both Bob and Karen are working. I've heard it's hard to get into childcare centers these days. When I asked Karen what she plans to do about work after the baby is born, she smiled and said, "I love my job, so I plan to continue." Karen works for an apparel company and has been at the same job since she graduated from vocational school. Raising a child won't be a financial burden for them. When I told her, juggling work and parenting will be tough, but I'll help where I can, Karen shyly responded, "That's why we're thinking of moving in with you and Dad." A small "what?" slipped out of my mouth, but fortunately, it seemed no one heard. Bob, visibly excited, leaned in and said,
"Mom, you're still young. You'd be happy to help with housework and take care of your grandchild, right?"
Both Bob and Karen seemed to genuinely believe they were making a good offer, but I was at a loss for words. It sounded like they were asking me to become their housekeeper. Sure, the grandchild will probably be adorable, but to move in and take care of the child? While I was struggling to find the words, my husband enthusiastically chimed in.
Bob and Karen really care about you, Mary. It's a great idea. Let's all live together, right, Mary?
I mumbled, well, this was not a good idea for me. I was frustrated with both my son and his wife, and my husband for not understanding this. Wondering if I was just overthinking, I decided to clarify with Bob and Karen. You're asking me to do housework and take care of the grandchild, right? I'm still working and already have my hands full with housework. Don't worry, Mary, you're so efficient. I really admire you, Karen assured me.
Yeah, Mom, you can handle anything. You raised me, so you can definitely take care of a grandchild,
Bob added. By taking care of the grandchild, are you talking about dropping them off and picking them up from daycare? If that's all, maybe I could manage. No, Mary, there's a shortage of daycare spots. We probably won't get one. That's why we're suggesting we all live together, Karen explained.
So you're saying I should work, do housework, and also take care of the child?
I couldn't help but let out a cold voice. Bob sensed my mood and hastily said,
Mom, maybe it's time for you to quit your job. It'll be easier on you.
He's underestimating what it takes to raise a child. I struggled enough raising just Bob. I don't want to be burdened with housework and childcare at this age. And being told to quit my job didn't sit well with me. Like Karen, I take pride in my job. I've been fortunate to advance in my career and have subordinates I want to mentor. I plan to work diligently until I retire, so I'm going to have to decline your offer. When I firmly stated my position, my husband said,
Come on, Mary. Are you trying to make life difficult for Karen? I never thought you'd do something like that.
What? Difficult for Karen? How is this making life difficult for her? It is difficult, came a voice from an unexpected direction. I turned to see Karen, tears brimming in her eyes. It's terrible that you won't help me when I'm asking you so earnestly. I thought you'd be happy to take care of your grandchild. Bob chimed in.
Mom, that's really harsh. You shouldn't say things like that just because you don't like Karen.
I was frustrated by the atmosphere, which had suddenly turned against me. But what annoyed me most was my husband. He was the one who had created this tension in the first place. I was done with him, especially after he used the strong phrase, making life difficult for Karen, to negate my opinion. Fine then, John, why don't you move in with Bob and Karen? I absolutely don't want to, so I'll leave this house.
What are you talking about, Mary?
Ignoring my husband's confused voice, I headed straight to my room.
What's going on?
I heard Bob's frantic voice as I gathered my valuables and put them in a large bag. Fortunately, I'm a minimalist at heart and only own the bare essentials. Once I finished packing, I hurried to the front door where Karen was sobbing. Why does it have to come to this, Mary? Can't you help us with our lives? Don't you care about Bob and your future grandchild? I do care about my son and future grandchild. But Karen, I have a future too. I'm only in my 50s. I have a lot of good times ahead of me. I've raised Bob to this point, and now I finally get to enjoy my freedom. Please don't interfere with that. I'd rather not see my grandchild if it means giving up my freedom. Stunned by my words, Bob and Karen stood next to my husband, who was shouting,
Where do you think you're going, Mary?
The most surprising thing about this whole situation is your attitude, John. Why would you use such a strong phrase like making life difficult for Karen when they're trying to dump housework and childcare on me?
It is making life difficult. Karen wants to continue working. You could help out.
If you feel that way, why don't you help out John? You're not working, but I am. That's right. My husband is currently unemployed. He's the same age as me, too young to retire, but he suddenly quit his job because he found it unfulfilling. I've been with him for decades, so I just sighed and thought, here we go again. But I can't live with this man anymore. Why couldn't he step up and say he'd take care of the housework and the grandchild? That's what truly disgusted me.
I'm a man. I can't do housework or childcare.
Bob is a man, but he can't do housework or childcare either, right? Isn't Karen re-educating him? When I turned to Bob, who was standing there dumbfounded, he said,
Well, I intend to do what I can.
It seemed Karen's re-education was working. I gave Karen a final apology. I'm sorry my son has been such a burden to you, and then faced my husband. After hearing all this, I've thought about my future. If I'm going to be stuck doing housework and taking care of a grandchild while John lounges around at home, then I'm not interested. I've decided to separate from John. I said to my stunned husband, thank you for everything, and turned back to Bob and Karen. I don't know if you'll live with Dad, but don't count on him for anything. Maybe if Karen re-educates him, he'll be somewhat useful. Goodbye. Have a healthy baby. I left the house without any emotion. My husband followed me for a while, but seemed to give up when he saw I wasn't stopping. I headed to my sister Lisa's place, where she lives alone and single. Lisa is a successful writer and lives in a pretty big house all by herself. When I explained the situation to her, she was thrilled to have me. Welcome, sis, to this single life, she joked as she greeted me. Living with Lisa was the epitome of freedom. We cooked whatever we wanted, went out only when both of us felt like it, and it was no big deal if one of us didn't want to go. Our finances were separate, so as long as we contributed a set amount to the household, the rest was ours to spend freely. Feeling at home in this new lifestyle, I sent my husband divorce papers and even hired a lawyer. The divorce went through. Lisa and I threw a party to celebrate, indulging in snacks and chocolates we usually wouldn't eat. It felt like a return to our younger days. As I had expected, my husband Bob and Karen gave up on living together. It was Karen who wanted out, saying there was no benefit in living with a man who couldn't handle housework or child care. Bob sided with Karen, and my husband was left to live alone. A year later, Bob called, almost begging me to take care of their child. As Karen had anticipated, their child wouldn't get into a child care center and ended up on a waiting list. I was tempted by the desperation in my son's voice, but I have my own life to live and declined. Bob said,
Mom, that's harsh.
But Karen's parents live not too far away. When I suggested they ask them for help, Bob seemed uncomfortable. Bob doesn't like Karen's parents even before they married. He's always found Karen's parents difficult, as they spoil her rotten. But the time for me to sacrifice my life to help my son is long past. I've prioritized my kids enough. Now it's time to live for me. After telling Bob to figure things out for himself, I haven't heard from him. It felt lonely, but I was content with my newfound freedom. Years later, I retired and was able to pass the baton to a subordinate I had wanted to mentor. As I left my workplace, surrounded by people and receiving a beautiful bouquet of flowers, I felt fulfilled. Now, what to do with the blank canvas of my future? Lisa suggested, let's go on a trip. She showed me a brochure for a round-the-world cruise. With my retirement fund and savings, and Lisa being a successful writer, we could both afford it. I never thought I'd consider going on a cruise, but as I looked at the brochure with Lisa, I felt excited about the future. I'm so glad I didn't sacrifice my freedom for the sake of my son's needs. My life is just beginning. I've decided to paint the rest of my life with only joyful colors.